Welcome everybody to our Healthy Habits series. Super honored to have Chris Riddick with us. He's also known as Afro Beets. And I'm going to let him introduce himself here shortly. But as you're watching and you have questions, please pop them into the chat box, and we will answer those as we go along. So I am going to turn it over to you, Chris, to go ahead and introduce yourself and dive into the topic of optimizing your space to grow food.
Awesome. Yeah. So my name is Christin Riddick. I am a garden to table educator. My mission is to really connect our people back to the land, specifically people of the African diaspora and beyond, and really get them to understand where their food comes from. And that's always been important for me. And I started maybe like some of you have, just not really knowing how to garden, not knowing where to start, and just trying things and just really growing from that. So I'm really excited to teach you what I've learned and what I know, and I'll be happy to get into more of my story today with you. So thanks for coming. I don't know if I can see the chat specifically, but I did have some questions for people, and I'm going to share my screen first just to kind of see what kind of audience I'm dealing with. So let me share my screen and then make sure you guys can see. Can everybody see that okay? Does that look good for the presentation?
Yeah, I can see it. Yep, It's popping up. Yep.
Great. All right, so a couple questions I would love you guys to put in the chat, and maybe you guys can read some of the questions or out to me or the answers. One, what is your level of experience with growing food at home? So how many years? It can be anywhere from 0, I have no experience, to maybe 1, 2 years, 3 years. I would love to get an idea of what our expertise looks like in this group, and that will help the presentation move along. So if you guys could put how many years of experience you've had with growing food, I would love to know. I'll give you a quick second to do that.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and answer for myself. Sure. 0 or near 0. I'll say 0.5. I actually had a little herb garden, like a pot with some sage that I grew, and that's pretty much about it. So
yeah, I mean, that counts. If you have ever taken care of a plant at all in any capacity, you're a gardener. You're a gardener.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So got another beginner here.
Got some more beginners.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. What are some of the years that people are putting out, or are they just mostly beginners?
Beginners, it looks like. Yeah.
A lot of beginners. Awesome. So we're gonna get a fresh start. That means you won't have to get rid of any bad habits. So once you you start off fresh, you get to keep it going. All right. Awesome. So first, I wanted to start off by saying, why is it important? Why is it important now more than ever to grow food? And we could just look at what's been going on this year. You know, if you want to become less reliant on our current food systems and just any systems in general, it's very important to kind of start growing your own food. You can see very quickly with COVID and when emergencies happen, how quickly things run out, right? Whether it's toys or, you know, different types of foods that are in the grocery stores, you never know when you won't have access to your local grocery store or produce market. So it's super important to understand at least where your food comes from and the right suppliers to get you what you need. So if you're not growing the food, you should at least know some local growers, some local farmers in your area to go to if you have an emergency, especially while you're building that skill. You know, growing your own food builds community and really helps with isolation. I've really made so many friends, so many acquaintances just by putting my garden in and putting it out there. I remember when I was living downtown in DC, North Capitol Street. I just moved in. It was right when the pandemic hit, and it was pretty lonely. It was pretty isolating. I was the only one in there at the time. And I started growing my little garden in the front. and I realized someone moved in next to me, and I don't think I've ever would have talked to this person if not for the garden. They literally saw what I was doing. They saw I was growing some tomatoes, some eggplants. They were like, wow, what are you doing? Like, how are you doing that? And they started asking me questions and things like that. And before I knew it, they started building their own garden next to me. They're like, oh, if you can do it, I can do it too. I even gave them some tips on where to, you know, pick up a couple things. And so we built that gap, built that relationship where, you know, we usually wouldn't have, you know, especially nowadays. I mean, back in the day, you know, you used to know your neighbor. You used to know everybody around you, know, big mom, grandma, everybody knew, you know, who was around. And growing your own food can really, really bring it back. Growing your own food also encourages, you know, eating seasonally, eating fresh. When you garden, you understand what is the right time to consume things, because the plants have kind of their own personal clocks within them and tell you exactly when they're ready to go in the right space in the right time. So understanding what is supposed to be grown at what time of year really allows you to appreciate how good food tastes. Like when you taste a tomato in the peak season, it's like night and day from anything you can get in the grocery store. And then lastly, with everything going on with COVID, mental health is super important. And plants, and there's studies, tons of studies on what plants can do for your mental health, and just being in green spaces and bringing the outdoors inside if you aren't able to move around as much if you would like to. So today, here's what I'm hoping we will cover today. I want to go over the foundational components of what every successful edible garden needs. Just the basics. If you don't have the basics, everything else that I'm going to tell you isn't going to matter. So those are important. I'm going to give you some myths that people tell me all the time that's going to stop you from progressing and growing your own food. I'm going to give you my 3-step framework for how to grow food no matter what your circumstances are. And then we're going to have some time for a little Q&A. So if you're excited to learn about this, go ahead and throw some I'm excited, yes, yes, yes in the comments, and we're gonna move forward.
Yeah, we did get a more experienced gardener join. She said she's been gardening for 15 years.
Oh, I
so
love it. I
yeah.
love it. Hopefully you learn something new. If not, maybe you can teach me, because I'm always willing to learn. That's the best thing about gardening. You can always learn something new. So what will happen if you aren't, you know, putting your best foot forward and at least trying to start the process of growing food? You'll always be resilient on others to put food on your table. You won't have control. You'll have to deal with whatever the current situation is of the food system. You have to pay more for fresh produce, where it would cause you a fraction of the price. You know, if you go to like certain places like Whole Foods and Mom's, the prices are, the food's usually good, but the prices are crazy. Rather, if you were to buy the cost of a tomato, you buy the same packet of seeds for the same cost, you'll get dozens, if not more, of those same tomatoes. So just from a budgeting standpoint, super beneficial. Food will continue to be a one-way street. You won't be connected to the land. Like a lot of people don't know how certain foods are grown, you know? Like a lot of people don't know that, like, you know, Brussels sprouts grow on a stalk. Like that's something I love, like this time of year. They grow on this super long stalk. You just pick them off and snap them off. And it's a beautiful plant. And then also, you know, thinking about it from an interior decorating perspective, like you could have so much more greenery in your space and just liven up your space with plants. So why not? Why not learn? All right, so let's get into the myths. Myths number 1, who's heard this myth? Or who has said this at one point of time or another? I have a brown thumb. I kill everything. I can't, you know, keep anything alive. I can't keep anything alive. I mean, we've probably all said this, you know, out of frustration, out of just being upset. But this is not true. This is not true. Just like you ride a bike and you fall, you don't say, oh man, I can't ride a bike, you know, just because you fall off a couple of times. That's the same thing with gardening. Just because, you know, you may accidentally kill a plant or it's not doing as well as you hope, that doesn't mean that you can't progress and keep growing. I mean, I'll tell you a little bit about my story. So my story of growing started about 3 or 4 years ago. The reason I started growing, it was actually out of service, really. I was in this City Year AmeriCorps program where they asked me to do a community service day for Martin Luther King Day. And I ended up working with this company during that day called Fresh Truck. And the idea of Fresh Truck, and you can kind of see a picture on the bottom left and the top right, they take these old school buses and convert them into produce markets. So you can literally go on this school bus and it's like a market with all tons of fresh veggies, a squash, cucumbers, leafy greens, anything you want in a grocery store is all on a bus. And they would go into these places called food deserts, which was the first time I heard even that term at the time. I mean, I live in DC, so right at the time where I was living in that area, I knew there were bad areas, but I didn't know how to call lack of access to food. I didn't have a word for it. And so food desert was very news to me. But when I heard that, I was like, wow, what is this? And I started doing my research, going down a wormhole, listening to people like Ron Finley. They call him the gangster gardener, which he grows, you know, on anything. He's growing on traffic mediums. He was growing, you know, in pools, all kinds of stuff. And so I got excited. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna try to grow something. So not even probably like 2 or 3 days later, I went to the store, got some seeds. I found some old soil that was in a basement that was probably like 10 years old. I threw some seeds in there, started watering, started looking up how to take care of it. And this picture on the bottom right here is actually my first harvest. So the first thing I ever harvested successfully, I'll say successfessfully. And it's a tiny thing. It's supposed to be a radish.
Oh, Christian, we're not seeing it on that screen.
Are you not seeing it?
No.
Let me see. Is it coming? Are you seeing any pictures right now?
No, just the cover, optimizing your space to grow food.
Okay, let me. There, is that better? No.
Okay, now yeah.
The picture, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, now we're seeing it. Oh
that.
Wow, that's all right. Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so this is, so like I was saying, this is the produce bus, the fresh truck bus on the bottom left, and that's what it looks like on the inside on the top right. But on the bottom right, that is a radish that is supposed to be a radish. It was my first radish. It was probably not even the size of my thumb. It was super tiny. A lot of people call this not very successful. I was just super happy that I got anything, to be honest. And I was super proud of that. And it actually tasted pretty good. But you'll see as I continue to go along this journey and tell you more stories, how I progress. But I didn't have a brown thumb just because I wasn't successful the first time. I just didn't have the right information. I didn't have the experience. So myth number 2, I don't have time to grow food. So I put this to bed this year. I've probably moved around 3 times this year because of COVID, from apartment to apartment. It hasn't been an easy journey, but I've always found a way to make time to grow food, to keep certain plants. And you'll learn a lot of resources on how to save on time and little tricks. One of those examples, and I don't know if you guys can see this video a little bit. You guys see that? All right, so that is a self-watering container that I'm putting together. So the idea behind a self-watering container is that there's a reservoir of water that stays inside the pot, and you basically put soil on top of it and actually just fill it up once a week, and you can start putting plants. So this is when I was putting in an eggplant. There's some parsley. You can put a ton of things in here, and once you get it all filled up, you can go ahead and water it and put a hole, like a little hose that will bring the water to that reservoir, and the soil, the roots will pull up that water and allow the plants to thrive, basically.
Wow.
So there's all kinds of little tricks and little things. Like if you're not grading, you're like, I don't know how much to water. I don't know how many times. This is a great way to save on time. There's also holes in the bottom of this. So if something like rain comes through, it'll just drain out the bottom. You can see this is like the completed project. You can even put covers on them, all types of things. And we had a lot of success with this this year.
Oh, wonderful. And Chris, I think we'll add the link to that YouTube video in
any
the
links
comments
or resources I share, I'll be happy to share with you guys.
Awesome.
Yes. All right. So myth number 3, I don't have the space to grow. I've literally, this one is the one that gets me the most, is because I've literally never had a big space. I think up until now, like I have one now, but the first couple years I started growing, I never had a lot of space. I was living in small apartments, you know, wasn't making a lot of money on AmeriCorps dime. And so I was like, okay, I need to find a way to grow no matter what. And that's what I did. So I took whatever I could do. I took this window space and I was like, okay, I learned a little construction experience, but it was very basic. I was like, okay, I'm going to use every little inch of space I have to try and grow. If I can't grow a lot of food, I'll get pots, I'll get containers, and just see what I can do. And it was successful, even though I didn't, understand that, certain vegetables need different sizes to thrive better than others. I was still able to learn from those experiences and just trying and see, what I did have available. So having a little bit of a growth mindset to get through. I know there's probably people on the chat who you've been through something, you've always been good at, like turning little things into something else. We're good at that. We've always been good at that. And so it's just about using that in this capacity here.
Wow, that's cool. I love how you went vertical with that.
Yeah, that's gorgeous.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many ways to do it. And I'm going to talk about the different spaces you can actually grow in. It doesn't just have to be a window. Even if you don't have a window, you don't have the light, we're going to show you how to get around that. And then the last myth I would say, I don't get enough light to grow food. And this is an example of why that's also not true. This is another video I did on how to set up a grow light situation. And you can see this was very early on when I started growing. This was, basil, tomatoes, eggplants, all got started under this light. It got to a certain point where I was producing more food that I could actually take care of and keep in my house. And so a story from that is I actually gave away one of my eggplant plants to one of the people who follow me on Instagram because she was local and in the area. I was like, okay, I have so much to give. I have an abundance. I want to share this with someone else. And I didn't really think anything of it. It was well done under the grow lights. It was healthy. I gave it to her. And in the bottom right corner of this picture, you can see she put that eggplant right in her garden bed outside, and it started thriving. I also gave her a tomato plant a little bit. And you can see how it started up top, and then on the bottom, look at how much production she got out of that. And so not only did she get so much production and yield from that, she also returned it back and started giving some of her vegetables away. So she came back to me and she's like, hey, I have so much eggplant and tomatoes that you gave me from that first plant. I want to come back and share that to you. And so in that process, just being grateful and sharing the wealth that came back to me, right? You reap what you sow. Like that is a real thing. That's literally what this is. You are reaping what you sow. And so that was just great to see that.
Yeah, that's awesome. A great way to help each other out, but also build community and even friendships,
Exactly.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I learn from people I share stuff with all the time. People send me food and different seeds and all those things all the time. Yeah. So I already talked about this, just some other reasons why you should grow food, having the ability to control what actually goes in your body. There's so many vegetables and produce that are filled with pesticides and are not regulated properly like they should be, because these are businesses, right? They're trying to make a profit. It's more profitable for you to be sick and uneducated than it is to be well informed. And so these companies aren't going to look out for you because that's going to cut into their bottom line, which is kind of true, but also not true, because if you provide people a quality product and you do right by them, they're going to go and support you. But that's another story.
That's a whole nother conversation.
And so, the ability to have that connection to the land, understand, how much it takes to grow food, really connects you to the land, really connects you to living things, and just makes you have an appreciation for food overall. I rarely waste food these days because I know how much life and energy I put into it. And that's important. All right, so let's get to the components, the basic components of every successful garden needs. And I'm gonna go over these. This is actually, I don't know if this is the right group for this, but this is an image from a TV show called The Avatar. And they have these 4 elements, these 4 nations that if they aren't balanced together in the same area, then it's just chaos, right? And so these are the 4 elements, and I'll break down what these mean individually in pertaining to gardening, right? Okay, so let's start with air first, because air people don't think about, but if you're growing inside, this is a big one. So air circulation is important for your indoor edibles. The reason why is because whenever you're growing, you want to duplicate whatever is going on outside. So the reason the air flows with the plant is good is because it stops mold before it starts. You know, you don't have to worry about certain pests if the wind is blowing. Air circulation basically mimics the outdoor conditions that lowers the risk of, you know, bacterial and pest issues. And so if you can get a fan of some kind in your indoor growing space, that would remove a lot of problems. And a lot of people don't think about that because they're usually worried about the other ones, which I'm going to get to. The next one being water. So watering is super important for plants. Most living plants are made out of 80 to 90% water. And so if you think about how much of the part of the plant that is, you will understand how important it is to water your plants. When plants don't get enough water, you'll know. They'll tell you, you know, the leaves will start to change. They'll start to droop a little bit. You're going to see all kinds of things. Plants need water to do things like photosynthesis, which is how they, you know, make their food, and how they get the energy to actually produce those fruits that we love so much. You know, water is also a way to pass nutrients throughout the plant. So it's a medium that allows everything to get in the right place. Next, you have the earth. I would say out of all of these is probably, they're all important but definitely the earth is important. The nutrients, the soil in which you grow is more important than the plant that actually exists in the soil, because the soil is the nutrients. It's the life force of your plant. You know, you should treat the soil as a living, breathing entity, because it is. There's a bunch of these tiny, you know, microorganisms that are doing great work for your soil to provide the nutrients that your plants need. And so I think it was like, there's more organisms and microorganisms in a teaspoon of soil than there are, you know, on the planet or something like that, something crazy. Like there's just a ton of like microscopic creatures that are doing great work if you have a quality soil. And so a couple of things you should think about when you want a quality soil. There's about 4 factors that you really need to pay attention to, especially with potting soil and indoor soil. You want to pay attention to the aeration. So making sure your soil is porous, kind of like a sponge, has ways where the roots can kind of move around flowingly, and also the water can move forward. You want a soil that has water retention. Something between clay and sand is like the perfect, you know, medium of soil, something that will hold that water so your plants can absorb the nutrients. And you also want a lightness, specifically for container soil, because if you have a soil that's too dense, it will collapse on the root system, and it won't allow your plant to breathe and really spread around like it needs to be. That's why when you go to the grocery store, Home Depot, and get the soil, it's very light. They have a different types of soil, right? They have the in-ground soil, and then they have the potting soil. That potting soil is supposed to be lighter on purpose so it can get aired out. You know, when you are growing outside, you have a network of things that are happening. But inside, you create your own world in that little pot. And then last, a good potting soil is, excuse me, a good potting soil has nutrients. So nutrients are also important. Is there any questions so far?
No, we did get a comment about one person has over, I think she has over 50 indoor plants. And then another person commented about, yes, I know a thing about apartment window container and balcony growing, but this sharing thing is quite inspiring. So she was really inspired by the sharing of your eggplant and tomato plant. I think you planted a seed, and not to
The
Be
actual.
corny.
Yeah.
But you planted a seed.
So many metaphors that
Yeah,
actually
I
work.
know.
It's incredible.
I had a question though about the soil.
Yes.
Because I recently started a garden last year and I got some really premium soil from this gardener that he actually made himself.
Yeah.
And my garden thrived. Like I didn't really have to really do anything. I just put the seeds in and miraculously they just grew. But then the second year, because it was COVID and I wasn't able to really connect with him, I went to Lowe's and bought some soil and I put it in there. And for some reason, everything didn't thrive the same. So my question is, can you get good soil from like a department store? And if you can, what are you looking for? Or do you need to always get it from some of these, you know, I got it from a guy who makes his own organic soil or whatever. What was the difference there? Or was it, maybe there could have been other reasons why my garden didn't flourish this year?
Just by what you said, I can already tell that the first guy you got it from it's about love. It's a labor of love.
Yeah.
Like your soil can be just as diverse as you are. It can be a very stylistic approach. It can be very simple as well, but the love you put into it, the ingredients, rather than for mass production, for an intentional use, like you can cater your soil to different types of plants. So you can have a soil for just your succulents. You can just have a soil just for your indoor plants. You can have, you know, a soil specifically for, you know, eggplants or radishes or something like that. And so it's really about a labor of love. Can you get good soil at the store? Yeah. It's not easy. It's not easy. You have to know what to be looking for. I'm going to give you a couple of things to look for. And I'm also going to give you some mixes that you guys can try at home as well. And I'll make sure to get that to you guys. One of my favorite mixes, a basic mix, I learned this from this organization called Cultivate the City. They have a fully rooftop garden and they only do containers. And so I know their mix was good. But a mix of coconut core, which is kind of dehydrated coconut husk. You know, the husk off the coconuts. If you've seen a brown coconut, the husk, that's like refined and put into these little blocks and these little discs, and you can pour water on them and hydrate them. And it creates a soil medium to help with water retention. Then you have rice husk, which is the shells of rice that will create pockets of air in your soil that will allow your roots to breathe and everything to move freely. And then compost. Compost is, if your soil doesn't have compost in it, it's not the best it can be. Okay. You can get you can add soils that are already pre-made and use it as that organic living component of your soil. But compost is like, they call it black gold, basically. That's why so many people are upset. There's people who are obsessed with composting. You know, they got people who compost in the back. They're always thinking of they're talking about compost tea. There's just, you need compost. I would definitely find a way to get some compost. That's a great. And then, you know, there's so many fertilizers you can do to add to your mix. And yeah, I'll be happy to share that. We could talk about soil is almost its own thing as well. Because it can be complicated, but I will share some of my mixes as well. The last thing I wanted to talk about with these elements is fire or sunlight. Okay. So this is the one that always got me a little tricky because growing inside, the light indoors is not the same as the light outdoors. When you're growing in the window, that's not direct sunlight. And some of these vegetables, depending on what they are, they grow with different hours of light. Basic and in real light. When you're getting light out the window, it's almost like a filtered light. It's almost like you're putting light through like a screen. It's not the same type of light. So there's a couple of categories for plants and how much sun they need. You know, you have your full sun plants, which is I'd probably say a minimum of 6 to 8 hours. And that's a bare minimum. They really thrive in more. But okra, peppers, corn, squash, sweet potatoes, those are full sun items. So those are a little bit trickier to grow indoors if you don't have the right setup. But shade tolerant plants, that means they need about 4 to 6 hours of sunlight. Kale, lettuce, mustards, oregano, Swiss chard, parsley, sage, herbs, different things like that. That's why they say herbs are some of the best things to grow in your window. they are shade tolerant, and so they don't need as much light. So if you were going to start a window garden, just put something in the windowsill, I highly suggest starting with the herbs. Those are great places to start. All right. So let me talk about the 3-step framework and the process of how do I transform these spaces, even if I don't maybe not have the right space or the right light. How can you do it, Christian? You asked me that, right? All right, so let's get into step 1, which is to evaluate your space. If you don't know what kind of space you're working with, you're going to be doomed from the start, because you're going to have all kinds of stuff attacking it. You don't know what's going to happen. You need to evaluate your space and really understand, what are you working with? First, you want to decide, where are you going to grow? Are you going to grow in the window? Okay, windows, like the best window is I would say southwest facing window. So like west can be too hot for some house plants, but for the most part, west is probably the brightest, just the way the sun sets and rises. South facing window is also great. If you're growing in a north or east facing window, those tend to be a little bit lower in light. So you want to consider plants that are more shade tolerant. Some house plants will do fine in there, but as far as growing food, ideally, if you're just using direct sunlight, those are the type of spaces you want to be in. You can also grow in your kitchen space. Herbs are a great space to put kitchen. Some kitchens have windows, some don't. We'll get into that. I've seen people grow in basements, with the grow light system, just because they have a lot of room in basements. Of course, you can bring plants into the bedrooms and be strategic about that. You need to learn about what the limitations of your space are. So light is a big one. That's the one that usually hold people back, right? How much sun are you getting? If you don't have enough sun, you're going to have to substitute with grow lights. And even then, I would suggest most of the time trying to get some type of grow light, unless you are starting from a transplant, which is basically the plant is already started for you. It's really hard to start seeds from scratch in a window. Just think about it, because you're getting light. It's not directly in the sunlight. If you have a couple of rainy days, you're already getting filtered light as it is. If you have a couple of dark, rainy days and you're just starting from a baby, seed, and you're not getting consistent light, it's already in trouble and you're off to a rough start, and it's going to, regress in its growth. So you have to think about that. And that's why I always suggest investing in some type of grow lights that are on the smaller side, maybe to start off. I mean, they make it so affordable and so accessible now. They have this thing called the Arrow Garden, which is like the Keurig of grow lights, basically. You can actually put these little pods in the machine and they'll grow in like a hydroponic system for you. Yeah. And those are kind of cool if you're just getting started. I've definitely had one of those. Those are cool.
Quick question from someone. They said, sure. Do you find moving around the plants to test where the best light should be? Like, should you be moving them around and play around with it, or?
Absolutely. It depends on what you're doing. So if you're growing, say you have some outdoor space and you're able to do a garden bed, it's a little harder to move around, right? So you want to kind of do that research ahead of time to make sure you're not moving too much, because there's some plants that, it's okay to move around. Other plants, once they get established and their roots are down, they don't really like to get moved too much. So if you're going to do that work and want the production to be right, go ahead and find that stuff out ahead of time before you start putting stuff in the ground. This is why the winter time is important, because this is a great time to plan out your garden and think about, how much space do I have? How much do I want to grow? And where will everything fit correctly? Because just because something looks good in one spot doesn't mean it's going to grow good in that same spot. So you have to understand the conditions of your different vegetables or whatever you're growing. One little trick, actually, and this isn't even in the slide, but I'll give you guys the freebie on this one. Before I buy any plant, I do something called a plant birth certificate. So if you're taking notes, write that down. Plant birth certificate. What that is I take a little index card. I'll draw a little picture of whatever plant I'm doing, and then I'll put the characteristics of what that plant needs. So I have a rundown of what that plant needs and how it's going to survive, and I'll put notes on the back. So I'll put the temperature of what the plant needs, how much to water it. Some plants like to be watered weekly. Some plants like to be dried out in between watering. So putting that information and just giving the rundown of what that plant is supposed to look like. That's been super helpful for me, and it helps me before I even buy plants because it lets me know, oh, I don't have the capacity for this yet, but maybe I can get there, you know, one day. Saves a lot of time too.
Yeah,
Okay.
we've got a couple of comments here.
Please.
Carlene is asking, I guess using your kitchen under mount lights can work also for your seedlings. It's, I guess, a comment / question. Is that?
Yeah, you can absolutely use kitchen space to get your seedlings going. I've seen people wired in their house where they have almost the cords inside the wall, so it looks like a lighting structure, but it's actually a grow light. And so there's different bulbs and lights you can get that can fit in your regular lamps or whatever you have in your, say, kitchen or your space, and you can convert it into grow lights so it actually gets the right lighting to help the plant grow and thrive in that space. Yeah, actually, in my room, I didn't even know I have a LED light that actually doubles as a plant light. And so my plants get a little bit of extra sunshine, and I got that on accident. Yeah. Any other questions? These are great questions.
Another one. Are there any other vegetables? Oh, wait. I learned the hard way that I needed to plant 2 tomato plants to produce. Are there other vegetables that need to be planted in pairs?
Yeah, tomatillo. Yeah, tomatillo plants.
Tomatillo plants.
Yeah, there's a couple plants, like you said. Yeah. Yeah, I haven't had, oh, she didn't say tomato, she said tomatillo.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay, yes. Yeah, there are some plants that do well together. There's something called, they're plants like companion growing is that the term that's called. There's some plants that grow well together. Typically, if you go around the world and look at things that are in specific cuisines, I'll give you an example, like eggplant and parsley. Those are like Italian cooking items, right? Those actually grow pretty well together. You can put those in the same container. You also think of the 3 sisters, right? So corn, squash, and beans. If you grow those 3 in harmony, those benefit each other. So the corn grows really tall, right? So that gives the beans something to climb up. Okay. And then the beans provide nitrogen to the soil. And then the squash will protect everything from predators and different things like that. So there's ways to grow things together that so everything is in sync. And when you think of the 3 sisters, a lot of those things are in, like, for example, Mexican cuisine. Like if you have like tacos or something like that, you might see those things in like all a taco or on a plate, you know, that go together in harmony. So if you think about how you eat and what your food culture is at home, that could go a long way in figuring out what goes together. Also, knowing the origin of where things come from helps in figuring out what kind of conditions it likes and what grows well with it. All right, I'm going to move on to the next slide. I know we got some great questions. Keep the questions coming. A couple last things on the evaluating space. Make sure you're protecting your home surfaces. I can't tell you, my mom was so mad at me when I was living at home. I used to get dirt all over the carpet and everything like that. Make sure you have some type of catch tray or something to, you know, make sure you're protecting your surfaces. There's so many ways to do it though. I line my pots with some plastic, like extra plastic or something I have around the house. You don't have to use plastic. You can use anything that will keep it from spilling out, and then putting another pot inside of that. So there's multiple ways to do it. And lastly is protecting your plants against pests. If you have those foundational components down, that will take a lot of the pest out. You'll still deal with stuff like fungus gnats and stuff from time to time, but it's an easy fix. You got sticky paper and things like that. All right, so let's talk about the light. So if you don't have any light, what does that even look like? So these are some examples in this picture of different types of lighting situations, grow lights. They come in all different shapes and forms. Like I said, you can have just bulbs for a specific plant, and you can just put it in one of your, you know, standard lamps and grow stuff that way. So like I was saying before, natural light is great if you're growing outside. Great, you don't really have to worry about this. But if you don't have the space and you're trying to grow something inside, you're definitely going to want grow lights if you want to take this a little bit more seriously. So there's different types of grow light. Like I said, the Aero Garden, the Keurig of grow lights. You know, you have adjustable, these long, flexible pieces where you can put it against a wall. You can grow vertically. I have the one on the top right. That is like a full spectrum light there. You can grow a lot in that. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of the differences between the lights and what to look for specifically, because that can get complicated. Yeah, so not all bulbs are created equally. You need to know that there are specific types of light that are similar to the light you would see outside. So you can't just take your random light in your house, put it by a plant, and then hope for the best. That's not going to work, unfortunately. I wish it worked like that. It's just not. That's not how science works. But things to keep in mind if you're going to do grow lights. So HOT5 fluorescent lamps are a good place to start. I will give those, maybe we can put those in the chat as well. But there's two types of things I want you to pay attention to. The Kelvin and the watts are, I would say, are the most important. So the Kelvins, if you do a 6,500 Kelvin light, those are great for growing plants in their vegetative state, like seedlings, salad greens, leafy herbs, things like that. Anything where you want the leaves and not necessarily the fruit. A 6,500 Kelvin light will do great. And then a 2,700 Kelvin is great for warmer plants who you want to flower and fruit. If you're trying to get a flower or a fruit from it, like tomatoes, like eggplants, like peppers, that's a number you need to pay attention to. Okay, so one is on the cooler side of the spectrum, and then one is on the warmer side of the spectrum. All right. Another thing about the grow lights is that grow lights need to sleep like you do. And so you need to make sure when you go to bed, your lights go off. Because what's going to happen is if you keep your lights on all night, they're just going to go and they can burn your plants just because it's just not natural. They have built-in timers into it. I don't know how God made plants, but they know, when they're getting too much light or not enough light. And they have that built in. So you have to be very specific on how some plants last in that state. So these are some measurements. I'm not going to get into the full detail of these, but you can have this access to this recording and look at this later. But like I said, Kelvin, watts are important because it's going to tell you how much it's going to cost to run these lights. There's very inexpensive lights, but you want to be careful because some can run you up if you don't have the right lights. But these are two things you definitely want to look at. And those are some other, if you've ever seen these on different light boxes or things like that, that's what those mean. All right. Any questions so far? Any other questions?
Just a comment. Awesome.
Thank you. Sometimes I like ramble on because I get so excited about this stuff, but I'm glad you guys are engaged. This is good.
Yeah.
All right. So step number 3, building your container. If you don't build the right container, if you don't have the right foundation, your roots, your plant are not going to survive. So first you need to pick the right container for your plants, right? So there's a couple of different, there's so many, anything that has some type of drainage in it can be a container. I've seen people grow in teapots. I've seen people grow in shoes, like anything that holds soil and has some type of drainage, it's a container. It doesn't matter. And so that's great because it leaves some creativity, but you also need to know which type of container works best with which type of plant, right? So you have plastic type of containers. You have the clay containers. Those are, people love those. The terracotta like pots, those are beautiful to look at. I will say I guess it's the salt around them builds up and you get that white coating on the outside of the pot sometimes. a little bit of water and vinegar mixture will like wipe that down and that'll clean it up. You also have grow bags. I wish I had an example of that, but grow bags are almost like this cloth almost. It's great for aeration and helping the soil breathe a little bit. And those are great. And they're also flexible. You can compact them and put them away. So yeah, clay pots, I like to put herbs in because herbs like to dry out a lot between waterings. At least some of them do. Anything you want to dry out quickly and release that moisture, that clay is going to absorb that moisture. So that's what you would put in the clay pot. If you want to hold that moisture a little bit longer, I suggest going in plastic pot. Most of the things, even though plastic isn't always the best, I'll put in there. I use also wood as well. I have a whole wooden garden container in my window, and that works great too. That's a great alternative if you don't want to use as much plastic, which is also important. Once you find out your container, you need to figure out if you want a traditional container or a self-watering container. I showed you a self-watering container earlier, right? So self-watering containers are great if you want to just hit it once a week. You still have to watch the maintenance and the growth of the plant, but for the most part, you don't have to worry about watering because the plant will absorb the water itself. Traditional containers, you might have to water every day or every other day, and that's fine too. Sometimes it's not worth going through the trouble of making this big container if you're just doing something like herbs and you have a watering day anyway. So yeah, definitely make sure you have a watering day. If your days to relax and to meditate is Sundays, you can pray and then make sure you water your plants. Just like you set up your time to pray and to meditate and spend some time to like de-stress, make sure you put your plants into that schedule as well. Every Monday is my watering day. So I'll put on some nice music. You know, the plants actually, I hear the plants like the music. I don't know the science behind it. You know, my plants like 90s R&B. It is what it is. But, you know, make sure you kind of talk to your plants a little bit. You know,
Yeah.
you kind of, you flow with them and just be in good spirits there. So, yeah, that's definitely important. Definitely have a watering day. That is important. All right. Building the right soil. So, yes, making sure you have the right soil is important. Like I said, equal parts coconut coir, rice husk, and compost. And then in that, there are other nutrients and fertilizers that you can use. And those are a great way to start. If you want to start off your soil, right, make sure it has a naturally built-in fertilizer. There's two types of fertilizers for the most part. There's like the grainy type of fertilizer that are actually components, little pieces that you kind of spread into your soil and mix in. It's a slow releasing fertilizer. And then you have your liquid fertilizers. And be careful with the fertilizers, especially the ones that are synthetic. If you can go organic with the fertilizer, that is the best because sometimes the synthetic ones, they're quick release. And so sometimes your plants aren't ready for all those nutrients and things and that come with the fertilizer. So you want to be very careful not to burn your plants from not using the right fertilizer. If you do use synthetic fertilizers, because sometimes it is easier, make sure you read the instructions on the back of whatever you get. They will tell you the exact amount you need to put with your plants. And so just be careful with that. All right. And then lastly, like someone was asking before, positioning your container for optimum growth. That's the best thing about growing containers. Containers are sometimes easier to move than if you are doing a garden bed. So I'm a big fan of starting containers. If you're the first time gardening, you can move those around a little bit easier than something that is in the ground. All right. We are moving. All right. So I want to leave some time for some more questions.
Yeah, we did get another comment here. This is very informative. I have developed a green thumb over the years and rarely experience fatalities, but you're really connecting the thumb to the brain. Thanks.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Well, it starts with that mindset first. If you believe you can do it, you got a chance. If you don't have a chance. Then
yeah, that's right.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Growing plants in the home. What would you say are some easy plants for beginners Because I think with me, I have a couple of plants that are so resilient.
Yes.
And even when I fall off of my watering cycle, sorry, but I do. When I water them, they just come right back. What are some really good plants that are kind of resilient for someone who, you know, you're just getting into this plant thing, and so you're just, you know, you might not be on schedule all the time, but they're a little more forgiving.
More forgiving.
Yeah.
Specifically edible plants or like house plants?
Like house plants.
Okay, house plants. Snake plant, definitely get a snake plant. It's beautiful, it's big, doesn't need a lot of light. It actually does better if it's probably like 10 feet away from the window.
Oh, okay.
I have one right here. I'll show you guys in a second. That one you only have to water every 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay, I'm getting
it. It survives on neglect almost. Like it doesn't like to be overly watered. Yeah. Another tip is one thing that people always forget when they're watering their plants. If you want to water thoroughly, it's better to water all throughout the soil than to do little spritz of water here and there. Water the plant fully get it moist. Let the water drip out of the bottom if you need to until you figure out how much water your plant likes you, because you'll learn after a while how much, oh, it dried quicker this time or it dried slower this time. Water all the way until it starts dripping a little bit, stop watering. And then when it drips out and falls into whatever flat or container it's sitting in, dump out that water. Don't let it sit in the water because that will cause root rot. That's where a lot of problems are, because people will let the plants sit in the water and it's just not good for most plants. Some plants like it, but most plants don't.
Yeah, same question Sersie had, but edible plants. What would be a good edible plant for a beginner?
Edible plants for a beginner, definitely. I usually say herbs, and herbs are still good because I will say it's not cheating if you're a first-time beginner, you don't know how to quite start from seed, to go to the garden store and get a plant that's already started for you. It's not cheating, I promise you. It takes just as much skill to keep it alive as it does to start it. It's just a different type of skill set and you're looking for different things. And so things I love keeping rosemary. Rosemary is pretty forgiving for me. As far as like leafy greens, a good lettuce is great. It can be pretty resilient. The only thing with lettuce is you want to keep it watered. I would also say microgreens. So microgreens are basically, if I had to like structure a course around it, I would actually get people started on microgreens, because microgreens, you have to keep the soil moist, but you get a quick harvest. So they'll grow about 2 inches or so, and then you can top them and put them on your salads. You can put it on tacos. You can put it on whatever you want and just cut it. And sometimes they'll come back depending on, you know, what those are. So microgreens, definitely. Herbs, definitely. Yeah, those are good ones.
Okay. Another question we have, do you use heirloom seeds?
Yes, good question. So for people who don't know, heirloom seeds are basically a great way to keep a little piece of history, right? So it's very important. Not all seeds, if you take the seeds out of them and put them into the ground and start trying to grow, will produce the same fruit, because a lot of the seeds today are hybrids, which means they are crossed with other types of seeds in their genetic makeup that allows them to maybe last longer in the grocery store or be resistant to a certain type of disease, but they're not good for producing the same fruit. For example, I love Scotch bonnet pepper, which is a pepper that's great in like Caribbean, African cooking.
Yeah.
I got a Scotch bonnet pepper thinking it was like an organic pepper, but it wasn't. It was more like a hybrid. Tried to hold the seeds, save the seeds, put it in the ground. I got the plant. The plant came up, but it wasn't, I couldn't get any fruit out of it because it wasn't the real thing. And so heirloom seeds are super important. I used to think heirloom was just a type of tomato, because the way people were like, oh, heirloom tomato. They used to go hand in hand. But no, heirloom just basically means you'll get a very similar result if you take the seed and put it in the ground. And it's very important for culture. Like a lot of cultures are tied to the foods they eat. So the practice of seed saving is something you can pass down from generation to generation and keep the stories behind those seeds. And I actually kind of like did an overhaul of my seed collection and said, okay, this is how many of these fun hybrid ones I'll try, but I want to get mostly heirloom seeds because I want to be able to pass this on to someone else one day.
Yeah, that's interesting because whenever my aunt comes from Jamaica, she brings me all the seeds that she got from her garden and gives it to me. And it is this bonding thing with it as well. Yeah.
There's that connection.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I got some seeds from someone in California. She's all the way in California. She was actually on my podcast not too long ago. And they were these zebra tomatoes. The striped tomatoes, and they were like the best gift ever because she took it straight from her garden and sent it to me. And now when I grow them this year, I'm going to send them to somebody else, and it just keeps going and going and going. So really important. Yeah. Hopefully I answered that question. I went all around with that.
Yeah, that was it's a good conversation. And then another comment here about sprouts also being easy to grow.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And heirloom seeds are God-made versus GMO seeds. So
yes, heirloom. That's exactly what it is. Heirloom is God made them to put on the earth for them to keep going on. Yeah, you'd be surprised about how many vegetables are actually not heirloom seeds or are not grown in the wild. They're produced in labs, basically. Like, you know, when you think about certain foods, like I was going to use carrots as an example because there's some places you can get carrots in the world, but they look different. They're not the bright orange ones like you see in the grocery store. They might come out white or other different colors, but you can't find an orange carrot in the wild. You know, same thing. You can't really find you can't find certain corns in the wild. A lot of that is used for like animal feed or, you know, to put in a bunch of byproducts. But yeah, if you look up certain things, I was surprised. There's certain things that just aren't God made, and it's very interesting.
All right, we got another question here. I kept my organic garden seeds, dried them for the first time this year. When do you suggest is a good time to begin the seeding process? Is the plastic wrap best to use for humidity? So
is the question like when is the best time to plant those seeds, or how?
Or begin the seedling process. When do you suggest a good time to begin the seedling process? And then the second part of the question is the plastic wrap best to use for humidity?
Good question. Yeah, those are two separate questions. I'll talk about the humidity one because I'm doing microgreens right now. If you can get some type of plastic zone to cover on top of your containers, that is great, what they call a germination dome. And that will create a certain level of humidity that will help to speed up the process of your seeds germinating and producing the roots and the leaves that it needs to start growing. Yeah, I would just reuse some of your old things like strawberry containers, for example. Great germination lids, something that is clear and can go through. You can use plastic wrap, I guess. That's not my favorite way, but you can use that as well. Anything that has clearance with the light and it covers whatever you're trying to do, yes, that'll work. As far as starting your seeds, the right time to start your seeds is based on the type of seed. I started my tomatoes. Like pretty early. Some in February, some in March. Depends on the type of the tomato. But if you're looking to go to the next season, most packages will stream from like February to like April. I think is a good time to start sowing those seeds. You want to do it before the last frost. So the frost date is when it gets cold outside and your leaves and your plants kind of like frost over, and you get that kind of like dew and everything out when you walk out in the morning. You want to put them in before that happens, because once that's over, then it's go time. Then it's time to bring your seeds outside and start your plants outside. So look at the back of the packets for the seeds, and they'll actually tell you when is the right time to plant those seeds. And there's some flexibility, give or take, but that comes with experience and then trying, different things.
Chris, thank you so much. This
No
was
problem.
incredibly educational and helpful, I know, for me and the people watching. So we deeply, deeply appreciate your time and sharing all this wisdom that you've gained in growing food at home.
No problem. I'm hoping some people will start growing after this, and I appreciate the time, guys.
Yeah, and if you do start growing, those that are watching, feel free to post some pictures in the group page. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Oh, also, if you guys follow me on the podcast, the Afro Beets podcast, we're going to have our wonderful, beautiful hosts as guests on the podcast. So you guys definitely got to check it out this Friday. I'm going to post that.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
You could go ahead and post your link, Christian, to the Afro Beets. So if anybody wants more information about growing, they could click on it.
Yeah. So you can find me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and I'll put the name of the podcast. You can just Google it and it'll come up.
Your YouTube channel or your website. Yeah. And then that way people could know where to find you if they want to get more information on it.
And this is the website. If you do want to join an email list and get more like garden education, information, inspiration, all of that jazz, follow me on afrobeets.org and sign up for the mailing list. Beets is spelled like the vegetable.
Wonderful.
Yeah.